This presentation contains information that was shared on October 26, 2014 at a congregational informational meeting of Great Bridge Presbyterian Church. It follows a lengthy period of prayer and discernment entered into by our session since early summer. During this period of prayer and discernment, we have sought to keep in balance our desire to be faithful to God, faithful to God's Word, faithful to shepherding God's people, and faithful to stewarding the mission and ministries that God has entrusted to us. During this meeting, we shared some basic information as well as some technical information, but we believe this is important for you to understand this process we have been engaged in. During this meeting, we will review some points about Presbyterian government and our decision-making process. We'll review the history of the position on ordination and marriage in both our denomination, the PCUSA, and here at GBPC. We'll review the issues that have arisen from this summer's General Assembly. We'll review the steps that our church has taken to date in light of these issues. And finally, we'll share the options that we have considered and the current direction of our session. First, we'll begin with Presbyterian government and polity. A few principles that guide Presbyterian churches. One is that we are connectional. This means we have a relationship with other churches, and we're bound together by a constitution. Our constitution is made up of two books, a book of order and a book of confessions. The Constitution does mandate some actions that will be a part of all Presbyterian churches, but it also gives guidance and recommendation regarding others. Presbyterians also have a representative, not a congregational system of government. This means that elders are representatives elected by the people through the congregational nominating committee and process, but that they serve to seek together to know the will of Christ and to represent both His will and the people of God. A Presbyterian church is governed by a session. Our session is made up of 12 ruling elders who are elected by the congregation. Sessions of local churches then come together and form a presbytery, which is a geographical connection of churches who work together in mission and ministry. GBPC belongs to the Presbytery of Eastern Virginia, PEVA, which has 57 churches from Williamsburg through Hampton Roads and up Virginia's eastern shore. The General Assembly is the highest governing body of the PCUSA, meeting biannually. They most recently met in June 14th through the 21st in Detroit, Michigan. Commissioners, who are both teaching elders, which is the title for pastors in our Book of Order, and ruling elders, are sent from every presbytery to General Assembly. They receive items of business in the form of overtures from those presbyteries. This is a flow chart depicting the different levels of Presbyterian government. You see General Assembly at the top. Then there is a level called the Synod, which is groups of presbyteries. Then there are the different presbyteries. You see the Presbytery of Eastern Virginia in the middle. Then, of course, the presbyteries made up by different churches and governed by church sessions. Our presbytery, PEVA, presently is made up of 132 teaching elder members or pastors, which can be pastors who are both serving congregations and those who are retired, 57 churches, and 16,156 congregation members of those churches. In our presbytery, there are different ministry teams that are made up of teaching and ruling elders that attempt to serve the churches of the presbytery. PEVA supports congregations by resourcing them through joint opportunities for spiritual growth and education, expertise, and training. There are two ways that GBPC gives to PEVA. One is called our Unified Mission Giving. Our pledge in 2014 is $65,000. This includes what is called a per capita payment to GA and Synod. These are amounts that churches must pay per member. This year, the GA per capita is $7.02 per member, and the Synod per capita is 75 cents per member. GBP currently has 1,229 active members, which means that $8,627 goes to GA and $921 to Synod, for a total of $9,549.33. This means that $55,450.67 of our pledge is used for ministries that are primarily within the bounds of our presbytery. The second way that GBPC gives to PEVA is through something called designated giving. And in 2014, GBPC has $11,000 in designated giving, which are specific ministries within PEVA or that PEVA supports that we give to directly. Campus Ministry, the Congo Partnership, Theological Education Fund, Presbyterian Homes and Family Services, which have changed their name to Humankind, are those particular designated ministries for GBPC, which totals $11,000 and brings our total giving to Presbytery causes to $76,000. One other thing to note about our connection to Presbytery or Presbytery's influence on us is in regard to church property. One of the principles that is in our Book of Order is that all property held by or for a congregation is held in trust for the use and benefit of the PCUSA. The implication of this is that we do not own our own property, the Presbytery does. And therefore, anything related to our property is something we have to get permission from Presbytery to do. Now, the General Assembly, as I mentioned before, met this summer in June. This is the highest governing body. And there are two forms of changes to the Constitution that were proposed or happened this summer. One is an amendment to our Constitution. That's to either the Book of Order or Book of Confessions. And something to note about that is that a General Assembly can propose an amendment, but then that must be approved by a majority of the 172 presbyteries before it can take effect. After a June General Assembly, presbyteries have until the following May to vote on any amendments. So of the proposed amendments coming from this summer's General Assembly, presbyteries are still in the process of voting on them. I'd like to say a few brief words about the history of the issue of ordination and marriage in the PCUSA and here at GBPC and session steps to date. The PCUSA and its antecedents, which means the denominations that were in existence before the PCUSA was formed in 1983, have been dealing with the issue of homosexuality since 1976, particularly in terms of whether it was sinful, and therefore rendered someone ineligible for ordination as an elder, a deacon, or a minister. Definitive guidance was given in 1978, which defined homosexuality as sinful and was meant to be guidance for the church. Since 1983, however, overtures have come to the GA both for and against homosexual ordination. In 2010, the GA recommended changing our ordination standards as defined in what was then G60106B to remove the phrase requiring ordained leaders to live in fidelity in the covenant of marriage or chastity in singleness. This was approved, this new language, by a majority of presbyteries, and the new language included requiring leaders to submit joyfully to the lordship of Jesus Christ in all aspects of life. This went into effect in the 2011-2013 Book of Order. A few words about how Great Bridge Presbyterian Church has responded to this issue. We have been consistent over several years. In 2001, we sent a letter to the congregation affirming our belief that marriage is between a man and a woman, and all officers of the church should live either in chastity and singleness or fidelity in the covenant of marriage. In 2006, we sent a letter affirming the same belief, and also sent an overture to the Presbytery, in which we encourage them not to accept the expression of any scruples or any disagreement from candidates relating to the ordination standards. In 2012, we sent a letter to the congregation in response to the changed ordination standards, affirming our intention to continue to be guided by the previous standards. We also chose at that time to join the Fellowship of Presbyterians, now known as the Fellowship Community, which is a group of like-minded churches, pastors, and elders who've covenanted together to see Scripture as our final authority in all decisions, choices, and actions. This year's GA has proposed an amendment to change the constitutional definition of marriage from between a man and a woman to between two people, traditionally a man and a woman. The vote at GA was 429 in favor and 175 against. Our presbytery will vote on the constitutional amendment in January. Our church can send 5 commissioners, the 2 pastors, and 3 ruling elders. There are potentially 160 voting commissioners in PEVA, half pastors or teaching elders and half ruling elders. I've been speaking about the constitutional amendment. Also this summer, there was issued an authoritative interpretation, which is a ruling on the Constitution, which again is the Book of Confessions and Book of Order, which is made by a General Assembly and takes effect immediately. Usually, an authoritative interpretation is issued when there is something that is unclear in our Book of Order or Book of Confessions. This year's General Assembly adopted an authoritative interpretation to grant pastors discretion in determining whether or not to conduct same-gender marriages in civil jurisdictions where such marriages are legal. The vote was 371 in favor and 238 against. As you are probably aware, gay marriage has been legal in Virginia since October 6, 2014. What are the implications of both of these actions? Neither the authoritative interpretation nor the proposed amendment are mandates on PCUSA congregations or pastors. Both actions include language stating that no pastor is compelled to perform a marriage service for a same-sex couple, and no church session is compelled to authorize the use of church property for such a service. GBPC will continue to hold the position that the biblical definition of marriage is a covenant between a man and a woman. GBPC has done several things in anticipation of and in response to the actions of our General Assembly. Working with Timothy Lim, we offered a 5-week class to address the social, psychological, biblical, ecclesiastical understandings and positions regarding marriage. The goal was to attempt to re-examine biblical texts, and hold together the biblical authority, but also a desire to be welcoming and loving to all. In July, the session of GBPC voted to suspend our payments to PEVA and to enter into a period of prayer and discernment in order to respond to the actions of the General Assembly. The options to be considered included to continue on in our relationship with the Presbytery and denomination as before, with no changes, to reconsider what our pledge was to the Presbytery, to PEVA, or to consider separation from the PCUSA. During the month of July as well, we held 2 listening sessions to hear concerns of the congregation regarding GA decisions. There were about 400 participants in the 2 meetings combined. In response to the authoritative interpretation, Ralph and myself sent pastoral letters indicating our understanding that we find no biblical authority to conduct same-gender marriages. A few of us also attended one of the listening sessions that was hosted by our presbytery. And we invited 2 presbytery officials, our transitional general presbyter, Liza Hendricks, and the moderator of the presbytery, Jeff Bell, to come to a session meeting. We wanted to hear their perspective on the impact of the GA decisions and also to share concerns that we had. During August as well, Ralph, myself, and Elder Kay DeZern attended the fellowship community event in Dallas. There were several highlights from that meeting. One, a reminder that Jesus must be at the center of all that we do, and a continued encouragement to reflect on how we can partner together to keep our focus on building the kingdom of God. The session of GBPC also sent a letter to the congregation. They indicated their support of the pastor's positions and their intention to not allow same-gender marriages to be performed on the grounds. Session also voted to reject the language of the proposed change to the Book of Order. Additionally, pastors have had countless conversations with pastors and leaders in PCUSA churches, both here in our presbytery and in the denomination. We've also consulted Jane Hubbard, who's a consultant who had been working with our presbytery several years ago and also was a part of a church that went through a similar discernment process. Our elders as well have had countless conversations with members of the congregation to hear their concerns. I'd like to share with you again in more detail some of the options that we have been looking at during this period. Again, those options were to continue our current connection and giving with PEVA and the PCUSA with no changes, to change our giving and level of participation with the Presbytery, or to leave the PCUSA. Because of the changes that have occurred over the last several years in our Book of Order, many churches have sought dismissal to other denominations, such as the Evangelical Presbyterian Church or the newly formed Evangelical Covenant Order. To handle these requests for dismissal, every presbytery was asked to create its own gracious dismissal policy. And the information on the next several slides comes from the gracious dismissal policy created and adopted by PEVA. The steps for those congregations considering a withdrawal would be that they would submit a request to PEVA's Commission on Ministry, who would then convene a meeting with the church's session and would then form what is called an administrative commission. Since our polity is not congregational, the Book of Order specifically limits the powers and purposes of a congregational meeting. In other words, they tell us what is appropriate business to be conducted at a congregational meeting. Requesting dismissal from the denomination is not regarded as an acceptable purpose for a congregational meeting. So neither a session nor the Administrative Commission would call a meeting for that purpose, but instead would seek to determine the position of the membership by hearings, interviews, and unofficial meetings and listening sessions. If a session of the church should call a congregational meeting for the purpose of considering actions leading to separation from the PCUSA, the Commission shall have the authority to dissolve the session and assume the full powers and jurisdiction of the session. The Administrative Commission is charged to work with the session and the congregation for a period of no less than 6 months and no more than a year, during which time they are attempting to enable all people who are affected by the decision the opportunity to be heard on the matter at issue. The policy also dictates that there should be no secret or secretive acts or meetings by sessions, pastors, congregations, or the Administrative Commission or members of the Presbytery. If, after all these consultations, it becomes obvious to the Administrative Commission that a strong majority of the active members, and our Presbytery's policy says no less than 75% of the active members, which for GBPC would mean 918. If that threshold is reached, then a request to dismiss the congregation goes to the next meeting of the Presbytery. At that meeting, PEVA would hear from members who are requesting the dismissal, those who oppose the dismissal, and from the Administrative Commission. If at that time the congregation's request for dismissal is approved, the congregation can then petition the Presbytery to receive its property. And this request would be considered at the next Presbytery meeting. At that point, there is an assessment as to whether or not there is a viable congregation existing which may make use of the property. Requests for property are negotiated in terms of the value of the property, and usually congregations are asked to make payment at an acceptable negotiated level for their property. There are guidelines in our Book of Order regarding property. A reminder that the relationship of a congregation to the PCUSA can only be severed by an action of the Presbytery. And if there is a division, meaning that there are some desiring to leave the denomination and others desiring to stay, and if the Presbytery can't reconcile the two, then the Presbytery makes a determination if one of the factions is entitled to the property because they are identified as the true church within the PCUSA. This determination does not depend upon which faction received the majority vote within the congregation at the time of a schism. So in other words, it does not matter if the majority of the congregation desires to leave the denomination. If there is a significant minority there, the Presbytery can choose to find in their favor. There's an interesting question at the beginning of a checklist that the Evangelical Covenant Order of Presbyterians, a new denomination, gives for those who are considering leaving the PCUSA. And they ask this question and make this comment: are you clear why your mission requires you to seek dismissal from the PCUSA. They say dismissal is a serious and potentially costly action. Dismissal will cost you time, resources, and relationships. Does faithfulness to the mission of Christ require your congregation to seek dismissal from the PCUSA? This is the question that Session has been attempting to discern and has been praying about. And it is the question that they've answered at their meeting this past Tuesday. Session's answer to the question is no. Our mission does not require that we leave the PCUSA. And there are several reasons for this. One factor certainly is the difficulty of the Presbytery's gracious dismissal policy. But additionally, we have listened and we have heard the diversity that exists in our congregation. And we have a strong desire for unity and to hold the center, to hold the church together. Additionally, we don't want dismissal to become our mission for the next 1 to 1.5 years, something that we have been assured happens from people in other churches who have gone through this process. Third, we believe we can maintain what we believe is a faithful scriptural position while in the PCUSA, and our letters have attempted to do just that, and that we have been provided distinction by our relationship with the fellowship community that lifts up these same values. We believe this property has been entrusted to us by God, and we have sought to use it for mission. There are many missions and outside organizations that use our facilities. We have a preschool. We host AA, AARP taxes, CAST, NEST, Boy Scouts, countless other organizations, as well as use our property for our own ministries. Therefore, we believe that our ministries and missions would be negatively impacted if we pursue dismissal. Session continues to discuss how we might become an advocate and witness to our beliefs at Presbytery meetings. We will seek nomination for participation on decision-making committees of our Presbytery, such as the Commission on Ministry. We will be building relationships with like-minded churches in our Presbytery, as encouraged by the fellowship community. Just this past Tuesday, we considered and accepted a request from First Presbyterian Church in Norfolk to form a mission affinity group, where we will be partnering with them in mission and in ministry. Concerning our giving to PEVA, Session has voted to resume and fulfill our 2014 pledge to PEVA. We felt it was important to honor a commitment that we had already made, and that our actions achieved their purpose of dialogue with Presbytery leaders. We do, however, continue to discuss what our 2015 pledge to PEVA should be. A number of factors will be considered, including our own current budget needs. Thank you for your attention to this presentation. Thank you for your continued prayers for our session, for our church, and for our denomination.